Imagine this. It is 11 o'clock at night. You are completely exhausted, your eyes are heavy, and your brain feels like it's wrapped in fog. But instead of turning off the light and going to sleep, what are you doing? You are staring at a screen. You are scrolling through short videos, checking notifications, looking at headlines, maybe doing some online shopping. You feel entirely drained, yet somehow, you're completely wired. It forces us to ask a really uncomfortable question. Why does modern life feel so incredibly stimulating, yet leave us so deeply exhausted?
That right there is the defining paradox of the modern human experience. We are drowning in stimulation, but starving for actual vitality. And naturally, when people try to figure out why they feel this way, they point the finger at one specific chemical.
Dopamine. It has become the ultimate internet buzzword, hasn't it? Everywhere you look, people are talking about dopamine fasting, dopamine detoxes, dopamine burnout. We talk about it as if this naturally occurring chemical in our brains is suddenly a toxic substance that we need to purge from our bodies.
Exactly. And that is where the conversation goes completely off the rails. Neuroscience is so much more nuanced than a trendy social media hashtag. If you actually eliminated dopamine from your system, you wouldn't reach some state of Zen enlightenment. You would literally lose the will to move. You would lose your curiosity, your drive, and your capacity to learn. Dopamine isn't the enemy. It is essential for survival.
Which means the problem isn't the chemical itself. The problem is how our modern environment is constantly hijacking it. Today, we are going to unpack why the whole concept of a dopamine detox is biologically misleading, and why the real secret, the actual hack for your motivation and your nervous system, comes down to something much more subtle. It comes down to timing.
I'm really glad we are diving into this, because the biggest misconception out there is that dopamine equals pleasure. People think it's the reward itself, but chemically speaking, dopamine is much more strongly associated with anticipation. It is the molecule of motivation and pursuit.
So it's not the feeling of eating the chocolate cake. It's the intense craving that gets you off the couch to go find the chocolate cake in the first place?
Precisely. It plays a massive role in reward prediction and reinforcement learning. Your brain releases dopamine not just when you get a reward, but when you anticipate getting one. From an evolutionary standpoint, this is brilliant. It's what kept our ancestors alive. It drove them to hunt, to forage, to build shelters, and to form habits that ensured their survival. It is the chemical that bridges the gap between where you are and what you need.
But that evolutionary brilliance is exactly what gets us into trouble today, isn't it? Because for 99% of human history, dopamine spikes were incredibly rare and very expensive. You had to expend massive amounts of physical and mental effort to get food, to find entertainment, or to gain social approval.
And now? Now you live inside an unprecedented engineered reward environment. You don't have to hunt. You tap a glass screen and a high-calorie meal arrives at your door. You don't have to seek out a community. You post a photo and instantly receive hundreds of quantifiable metrics of social approval. Social media platforms, ultra-processed foods, digital entertainment, they are all explicitly designed by very smart engineers to maximize engagement and keep you in a state of perpetual reward anticipation.
It's like we are redlining the engine of our nervous system 24 hours a day. We never actually exit stimulation mode, and I think this explains a phenomenon so many people are experiencing right now. It's this strange, flat emotional state. You're constantly consuming high-intensity media, yet you feel less satisfied. Everything in normal life starts to feel a bit boring. It's harder to focus on a book, or a conversation, or a deep work project.
What you are describing is reward saturation. The brain is an incredibly adaptive organ. When it is subjected to continuous, excessive, high-intensity stimulation, it attempts to protect itself. One theory is that it alters its reward sensitivity. Your baseline for what feels motivating or satisfying shifts upward. So, when you try to do something normal like reading a book or going for a walk without your phone, it feels understimulating because your brain is comparing it to the artificial novelty it's been flooded with.
Which naturally leads people to panic and think, I need a dopamine detox. I need to sit in a dark room and stare at a wall for 24 hours to reset my brain. But you're saying that's a fundamentally flawed approach.
It is a biological impossibility. You cannot detox from a core neurotransmitter that regulates healthy brain function. It's not a toxin. The issue isn't that you have too much dopamine in your brain. The issue is chronic overstimulation and, crucially, poorly timed reward exposure.
Let's dig into that word, timing. Because this feels like the paradigm shift. If we aren't supposed to eliminate pleasure or stimulation, how should we be timing it?
Timing matters enormously in biology. Our dopamine systems do not operate in a vacuum. They are deeply tied to our circadian rhythms, our sleep cycles, and our stress levels. When you engage in high-intensity digital stimulation late at night, you are sending a massive biological contradiction to your nervous system. You are telling your brain it is time to hunt and gather, right when it is supposed to be powering down for cellular repair.
So that late-night scrolling isn't just a bad habit. It is actively interfering with your sleep architecture, your attention regulation for the next day, and your overall reward balance.
Exactly. Sleep deprivation itself significantly alters dopamine signaling. When you don't sleep well, your emotional regulation drops and your reward sensitivity gets skewed. Have you ever noticed that after a terrible night of sleep, you are much more likely to crave junk food, snap at a coworker, or impulsively buy something online?
Absolutely. My willpower goes completely out the window. But what you're saying is that it's not a moral failure or a lack of discipline. It is my nervous system desperately seeking regulation.
Yes, and the exact same mechanism applies to stress. Chronic stress elevates cortisol, and when the brain feels that emotional discomfort, it seeks a quick escape. It seeks distraction, novelty, sugar, social media. When your nervous system feels overloaded, compulsive reward-seeking behavior is not a weakness. It is adaptive biology, trying to find a lifeline.
That completely reframes the conversation. We punish ourselves for our lack of focus, without realizing our physiological foundation is cracking under the weight of constant stress and poor sleep. And this is where the concept of wearable physiology becomes so fascinating to me, because we don't have to guess if our nervous system is overloaded anymore. We can actually see it.
Right. This is where metrics like heart rate variability, or HRV, become incredibly powerful. HRV is essentially a mirror reflecting your autonomic nervous system's balance. When you are caught in that cycle of late-night stimulation, poor sleep, and chronic stress, your HRV begins to decline. Your recovery patterns become impaired. The body always keeps the score, and eventually, it reveals that overload physiologically.
Which is exactly the philosophy driving the OXYZEN ring. It isn't just a piece of hardware that spits out raw data so you can obsess over your steps. It is designed to interpret these exact physiological signals. It looks at your stress, your recovery, your sleep architecture, and your nervous system balance, and helps you understand how your behavioral patterns are actually shaping your reality.
Because the goal of health intelligence isn't to make you a robot. The goal is to help you understand the rhythms your brain evolved with. Healthy dopamine systems were built around movement, exploration, physical sunlight, social bonding, and meaningful, hard-earned achievement. They were not built for endless digital reward loops.
So the real hack, the actual way to reset your motivation, is returning to rhythm. It is protecting your sleep consistency. It is getting morning sunlight in your eyes before you look at a screen. It is engaging in physical activity and deep, focused work, and then allowing your nervous system the grace to actually recover.
Precisely. Sustainable motivation emerges from balanced reward cycles. It's about contrast. The brain thrives on the contrast between intense effort and deep rest. When you blur those lines with constant, low-level artificial stimulation, you lose your edge. Small behavioral changes, like keeping your phone out of the bedroom or taking a walk without a podcast playing, can significantly restore your cognitive clarity over time.
It is such a liberating thought. The goal of life is not to eliminate pleasure. It is to rebuild our sensitivity to normal life again. To be able to sit with our own thoughts, to feel the quiet satisfaction of a job well done, without needing a digital fireworks display to validate our existence.
Dopamine is what drives human life itself. You don't need to fight your biology. You just need to learn how to navigate a world that is constantly competing for your nervous system's attention.
And once you understand that timing is the real variable, you take your power back. You stop being a passive consumer of stimulation, and you become an architect of your own focus. It makes you wonder, if you just gave your nervous system a chance to breathe, what might you actually be capable of?
That is the question we should all be asking ourselves.
This is OXYZEN Health Intelligence. Until next time, take care of your rhythm.